Screw it. Goldeneye episode. Before Goldeneye, Bond games had been stereotypical to the movie-based game. Profitable, but at best a mediocre game being carried by the license. So it went in the 80s and early 90s through a slew of lukewarm adventures. By 1994, Nintendo found themselves with the James Bond license and gave development of the next James Bond game based on the then upcoming Goldeneye film to UK-based Rare. Their design went through several iterations, at one time being a 2D platformer for the SNES because of their recent success with Donkey Kong Country, to at other times being a rail shooter based off of Sega's Virtua Cop series. After 2.5 years of development, the design had morphed into the fully 3D first-person shooter for the Nintendo 64 we know today. Releasing with the hype machine of the next Bond film, Tomorrow Never Dies, expectations were actually rock bottom for yet another licensed movie game. What happened next surprised everyone. Goldeneye was the critical and commercial smash hit of 1997, eventually moving over 8 million copies and solidifying itself as one of the most legendary video games ever made. Is that praise well-deserved though? Or are we staring at this Nintendo 64 juggernaut through rose-tinted glasses? One thing that cannot be denied about Goldeneye is that it proved that the console first-person shooter could work. Without the success that Goldeneye found, modern mainstays like Halo and Call of Duty would have never found their footing. While these may seem like simple things today, Goldeneye brought things like headshots, stealth levels, and manual aiming to console shooters. Prior to this, the vast majority of shooters had compromised design and control that had you simply running through the levels and the game would auto-aim for you. The immersion of being able to manually pull off a headshot on an N64 is hard to deny. Also hard to deny is the impact of the game's multiplayer. 4-player split-screen, fully 3D first-person shooter gameplay on a console that had the things Goldeneye brought to the table was again proof that consoles weren't just here to sit at the PC game's kid table. As a child of that era, I cannot count the number of nights I lost to sitting around with 3 friends cramped around a small TV. Despite the low resolution and frame rate that struggled at best, nights spent playing this with my friends are some of those core memories I can never forget. But time wears on, and games evolve and change. And soon it became clear that the N64 had some major problems that future consoles could, and did, fix. Twin thumbsticks made controls much smoother, stronger hardware meant higher frame rates were achievable, and the promise of online play on consoles removed the need to cram 3 friends around one TV. By the early 2000s, Goldeneye had faded into the night, but its tale wasn't quite over. In 2007, Microsoft, now the owner of Goldeneye's developer, seemed sure they would be able to figure out the licensing minefield that was Eon, MGM, Nintendo, and Activision. As such, they set Rare out to remaster Goldeneye for the Xbox 360. Unfortunately, the rights could never be sorted out, and the remastered game was never released. However, in 2021, a nearly complete build of the game leaked online, and the footage you've been seeing is from that build. This version of Goldeneye featured modern controls, higher frame rates, better graphics, and online multiplayer. It was a chance for a comeback that Goldeneye deserved, but never got. It's a comparison point I feel the need to make during my look at Goldeneye, as I strongly feel the Nintendo 64 does Goldeneye an injustice. The terrible Nintendo 64 controller lets the game down. The hardware results in a technical mess. And in 2022, getting 4 people together to play the Nintendo 64 is nigh impossible. It hurts me to say this, but Goldeneye, as it exists on the Nintendo 64, does not hold up today. Goldeneye is based loosely on the film it's named after. You more or less follow the same route as Bond through the film, with some new sections unseen but referenced in the film, and some sections expanded. Scenes from the film, like the opening with Bond bungee jumping off the top of a dam, have been expanded into full infiltrations where you must download data off Russian servers in the dam and disable their alarm systems prior to making the jump. Story is largely handled via briefing screens between missions where M, Q, and Moneypenny all give you the context for what's happening and what you need to get done next. Scripted story events in the game are few and far between and land with the impact of a wet towel, as characters largely just stand in place delivering poorly written and uninspired dialogue in the form of text boxes that appear at the top of the screen. The story doesn't matter here though, as you are here to be the titular spy and do spy stuff. While every mission will eventually devolve into a shooting gallery, depending on the difficulty you select, there are a plethora of other things you need to accomplish besides getting from the start to the exit. This is one of the smartest decisions made in the development of Goldeneye, as it adds tremendous replay value. While on the lowest difficulty setting you may just need to get from point A to point B, on harder difficulties you'll also need to accomplish other tasks such as defuse bombs, break into safes, take photos, or shut down communication networks. These new objectives completely change the way you need to play and approach each level, resulting in something that feels significantly more fresh than just enemies who hit harder and can take a few more bullets. Let's take the second bunker stage as an example. On the lowest difficulty, you need to collect a tape of your escape to cover your tracks and then leave with the Bond girl. On the highest difficulty, in addition to collecting that VHS tape of Goldeneye, you must also destroy every security camera, collect blueprints from a locked safe, and collect 2 additional documents scattered around the map. It turns a simple job into a much more complex one, and adds tremendous replay value to the already 10-hour-long campaign. Every difficulty level adjustment also makes things harder for the player in more subtle ways. On the lowest difficulty setting, the game has a significant amount of auto-aim to hit enemies. On the next difficulty, it's toned down a bit. And finally, on the hardest setting, it's almost completely absent, forcing you to use the game's awkward manual aiming system constantly. This is where the failings of the Nintendo 64 start to show up. As the auto-aim slowly vanishes, the shortcomings of the controller become apparent. The single thumbstick while using a second D-pad to aim is something that artificially adds significant difficulty to the game. Consequently, the Xbox 360 version with its more modern controls handles this loss of the training wheels much more smoothly. One thing that the remaster smartly did not touch was the audio. Goldeneye had an incredible soundtrack composed by the Rare team that made astounding use of the Bond theme as well as the film score to create an energetic and pulse-pounding soundtrack that perfectly complements the spy thriller shooter. Who can forget the damn intro song? Or the combat music from the Silo mission. Even the music from the final showdown is quite memorable. Unfortunately, despite the outstanding music and clever level design, the control issues and the massive technical shortcomings absolutely cripple the game. Despite the fuzzy appearance and blocky graphics, this game was simply much too much for the Nintendo 64 to handle. I often hear about the importance of 60 frames per second for a game's responsiveness and controls, and how you need that 60 to be able to smoothly control your game. I've never truly understood it, as 30 has always seemed perfectly playable to me. Goldeneye has provided me a rare opportunity to understand that. The Xbox 360 version here targets 60 frames per second, and while it never quite gets there thanks to the leaked build being unfinished, the game is responsive and flows beautifully scene to scene. The original Nintendo 64 release struggles to hit even 30. Frame rates constantly hover in the teens or lower, and as such it can often feel like you're fighting the game for control as it's sluggish to respond. Let's take a closer look at the opening moments of the final mission of the game. The game is smooth and responsive on the Xbox, whereas on the Nintendo 64 it lurches forward, feeling like a computer game on the verge of crashing at all times. Directly because of this, I found I was able to beat the game on a higher difficulty on Xbox 360 than I was able to on Nintendo 64. These shortcomings make it an extremely difficult game to play today. While it may have been the new hotness in 1997, and it walked so modern console shooters could run, today, It's barely able to crawl. Due to licensing issues, Goldeneye has been forever trapped on the Nintendo 64. The leaked 360 remaster is the closest thing we ever got to a re-release. In fact, the problem reached a point where Activision released a remake of Goldeneye for the Wii, PS3, and Xbox 360 reimagined as a modern-day Daniel Craig movie. They even got Daniel Craig himself to come in and voice the character.
If you insist.
However, it plays nothing like the original game, going out of its way to play closer to Call of Duty and subvert your expectations at every turn. However, that's a game we'll talk about another time. If you feel the need to revisit this museum piece, it won't break the bank, with cartridges currently going for barely $25. There's a lot worse ways you could spend $25 in a weekend today. Goldeneye is an exercise in how you should never meet your heroes. There's the hint of brilliance, and you can see why people talk about this game with the reverence they do, but it has aged so poorly and is so hampered by the controls and technical failures, it's a tough pill to swallow in 2022. Knowing that a virtually complete remaster exists but can't be released that resolves these problems and can truly show off the game Goldeneye wants to be, makes it sting that much harder. Legends never die, and while Goldeneye's legacy is cemented forever, I can only hope that someday the game will finally be remastered and given the polish it deserves.